Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning if you're in a time zone. Thank you, June, for inviting me again. My name is André, and I work for Gitlab. It's a technical company building a product to solve the entire life cycle of DevOps. And we've been working remotely since the start. I joined Gitlab 2 years and a few change ago. And so my idea here is just to share a few tips of what works with us and get some answers for you. So that's the introduction. As to the presentation, when June launched me this challenge, what I feel is important is seeing an example. And most examples that are out there, like GitLab's handbook, is a full-fledged documentation base that's been evolving over the course of several years. If you're just getting started, it might be a little bit daunting to see how you get from zero to there. It takes time, of course, but I prepared a little sample, just like in the cooking shows, of something that can help you vision what you're aiming for. So yes, June, like you were saying, one of the most critical aspects of nailing and working well remotely is documentation and the way that each company does documentation. So I'm going to share my screen and start telling the story that I want to tell. All right, I am screen sharing. Right, so what I have here is an example of a guidebook. So we grabbed a fictional company, which everybody kind of probably remembers from cartoons, called Acme. And this company is supposed to be like a 3D printing company, has all kinds of usual departments like the engineering, sales, has marketing. These teams is usually present in many kinds of companies. For this particular purpose, it's kind of irrelevant what they do because you can map this to all kinds of activities. But this is kind of an example. So some of you might have heard of Notion. The reason why I bring up Notion and why I used Notion for my example is because it's easy to get started. You don't have to argue about getting it set up, installing software on your data center, deploying. It's just easy to get started in any company, even if without engineers in the staff, you can get started with Notion. And it's been very popular with groups and open source projects to just document everything. So that's why I use Notion, but the tool itself, it's secondary and honestly irrelevant to this topic. As long as you document it and you make it available to your team, you're going to reap the benefits of that, okay? So what I've prepared here is just a sample of what you could get started for your guidebook for your company. So this is kind of like the homepage of the guidebook. And the way that this works is you can have multiple workspaces for different kinds of things. This example is just like a little bit of a documentation. And what you put in there might change from company to company, but some things are important. So one of the examples is what makes your company, right? And a lot of companies have done this. They've sorted out their mission. They've communicated that through marketing and brand guidelines and stuff. But the staff of the company is not always aware of those values and those missions. They're probably not watching the website every day because they're building something. So this is a way to capture those values, right? And you might think, why is it important to document this in a knowledge base for internal purposes? The reason is that the values of a company are supposed to permeate throughout the decisions that each department does on a daily basis, right? It's normal for us at GitLab to be making a decision about engineering and stopping ourselves and thinking, wait, what do the values say? And we go and we check out values. We check, what do they say about the iteration? And this has evolved over a bunch of years, but there's a lot of text here that explain a lot of sub-concepts of the values, right? And this keeps us centered, and we can always grab these links and share it with new employees to really get the feel of the company's ethos, right? So that's one of the reasons why this is important to document, is because this will be useful on every day of your company to all kinds of people. If you don't have them easily available and extendable, it's going to be a little hard to have it present on every discussion, right? So say that I'm talking about a topic and I feel like, oh, kindness kind of needs a little bit of sprucing up or something. So I can come in here and add something to make that point more clear. Say that somebody says, oh, I didn't realize that kindness actually involved something, right? So you come on over here and you document it. And with time, that will expand into becoming a good representation of the values of your company, right? So this is one example, right, where you capture the mission and values, all great. And then one of the other important parts is communication, and rules are going to have to change when you move to a remote environment. So writing them down is going to make sure that everybody is evolving in the same direction. Okay, and it might be that people, by reading this document, be like, oh, actually, I don't agree with that. So let's discuss it and update the documentation to reflect what we actually feel is the important aspect of communication. So just a few examples of this. Was very improvised, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. So there's a couple of topics here that we put for internal communication: being respectful of others' time, give all the information you need when making a request. These small things are particular aspects that will make the asynchronous communication easier. So when you're working remotely, you might ask the help from some colleague that is not currently on the computer. He might be walking the dog, but you don't see that he's not on the computer. So asking for help and giving all the information they need to give you the answer is key to make this communication flow well. So writing in the guidelines will make this aware for people coming into this reality, right? And then you can have specific styles of communicating to clients or to the community. So writing that down will be a guideline for others to embody those values. And the thing is, I read this once, I'll forget it, right? I need to come back to it several times. So the other part of important documentation is the tooling that you're using. And why is it important is because you need to have a tool that everybody has access to. And what is normal in companies is each department will evolve to their own tooling, and then they're in silos, they're in separate islands. And whenever they need to communicate with each other, it's cumbersome. Like they don't have accounts for Trello or for Envision or something like that. So whenever there's like a barrier that somebody needs an account, it's something that is a hurdle for them to go over. So most often than not, communication breaks down on those barriers. Writing down the tools that the company recommends for each kind of communication kind of boils it down to one for each kind and makes everybody be present on the same kind of tooling. The thing is, you can always suggest new tooling and it will be documented here, and then everybody else will see, oh, we're using that thing for that. Right, cool, let's use that. And then again, social communication, informal communication, getting together for not just work is also important for the company to communicate to the employees. Those things are going to have to change now that you're remote. So people will not guess that things are different. So you can send an email, right? And that's buried in everybody's inboxes. So it's hard to involve everyone if you miss that email or if you can't remember the details. So being in the documentation, sometimes they can use this link to share to some, oh no, well, actually we have a daily call, people. So here's a link, go read about it. And then you can write rules about it. You can see, for example, one of the things that I've given an example here is you can have helpers along the way to guide people to the right path, because the clearer the documentation is, the less time you're going to have to spend explaining things to people one-on-one. Right? And you can think about this as an efficiency thing. If it's written down somewhere and people can discover it on their own, they won't use your time or the manager's time asking, hey, how am I supposed to get added to the calendar of the event if I'm not there? So you can write these things along in the documentation. And then just to wrap it up, you can create sections of the documentation for each product, for each team, and each team will take care of their own corner, right? They can start off by writing special guides for onboarding, for example, right? Where they will give an instructions to their employees how to onboard, that kind of thing. Write technical documentation that is special for them, but it's in a little section of their part, right? So they can take ownership of that, and each section will be responsible of expanding their documentation to whatever makes sense for them, okay? The great thing about Notion and other kinds of tools is that you can use it for all kinds of purposes. And this in particular has been very useful for different kinds of groups. Writing agendas for meetings and writing notes basically for each meeting. So you can use this to make the notes visible to the entire company. This is just an example of what you could be writing down for a weekly synchronization call, right? And the thing is, which is also very important, is you can specify that in the meetings documentation. What do all meetings need to have? And then if somebody spends an hour discovering what makes meetings efficient in a remote environment, they can write this section, recommend everyone an approach, communicate that, and then from the day forward, people can follow those guidelines, right? And you can say that shared meeting notes document created and shared in the invite. This is very vague. You probably need to explain a little bit more, but this kind of makes everyone aware that to schedule a meeting, I need to do this from now on. And you can change the process significantly very fast if you're writing things into documentation. Now, one of the things we do at Gitlab, for example, with our handbook is we own our own handbook, right? The website is actually a project within gitlab.com that we own in our own product, right? This allows us to create verification flows about whenever you're updating the documentation, you can have someone approving or not approving that change. And that's not something that every company will need, but there are tools out there that will allow this kind of control. It's up to each company to decide whether they want to have something really big and complex, or there's something very simple that everybody can update, and then they trust each employee to do that. Which you also can see is that later, if you're using a paid version of Notion, you'll be able to track each version of the document, who updated what, so it's easy to have accountability for it. That's up to the companies to decide, because not every company are the same regarding transparency, but it is important for you to understand that the value of having this written down is much bigger than the risk of having the way you do meetings leak out, right? By the way, one of the things that I want to say about Notion is that by default, this is private. I made this Acme guidebook available to all, so I'm going to share that in the chat so that you can take a look. The thing is, by default, it's private. Only the people that you sign up to, that are signed up to for this documentation, will have access to this information. You can set up. So this is kind of like my membership of my demo, and you can specify that you only allow emails from a certain domain to sign up. So it's easy to control access to this documentation base. I've made it public so that you can all see it. You can also control visibility per section. So a lot of helpful features out there. And I haven't even gotten started with all kind. I'm not the most proficient user of this, but you have templates that you can use for all kinds of things, like roadmap, engineering wiki, docs. You can have a to-do section, kind of like this, or a roadmap, kind of like this, built into your documentation, right? So it's totally up to you to explore those toolings and to make them work for you and for your advantage. Right. One other aspect I wanted to explain is one of the things that has helped us a lot is by keeping a single source of truth culture. I've talked a lot about this in the past. And in the last panel we did by June's invitation, I mentioned the single source of truth. So what that means is the company has in the documentation somewhere declared what is the tooling that will be the single source of truth for an aspect, whether it's a task, whether it's the process. So the process would be the guidebook. The task would be on the issues that you use, like the issue tracker. So what I'm talking about is like whenever you're having a call about this issue and you discuss this, whether it's a one-on-one or a group call, you can come back down to the issue and say, okay, per the meeting I just had with June, this issue is now blocked and will be moved to the next milestone, right? You can go like milestone. I don't know if I have milestones in this project. I don't think I have. Maybe backlog. No, I don't have it. But anyway, I could move it directly to the backlog. And by writing this small update, it will radiate this information to whoever comes to the issue later, right? If I hadn't posted this and I just kind of moved the milestone, they would be thinking, wait, what happened there? Why was it moved to another milestone? So making sure that you promote the culture of having an issue or an epic or whatever you use to track your tasks, you should be able to understand the history of that issue by reading the comments or the activity section, right? And whenever something happens outside of that sphere, that's okay, as long as you come over here and you put it up here. Or you say that, okay, mockups are in InVision at this link, right? Whatever. So it's important so that even it doesn't make sense for me to be replying to myself, you tell the story through the activity, because this ensures that whoever's not in the immediate surroundings of that decision being made, you'll be able to trace it back to where it was made through the history of the issue. And with that concludes my initial presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now, and I'll move over to questions. June.
Yes, we do have a couple of questions aside from the pending questions that we collected before the meeting. So I have Meg. Meg, I hope it's okay if I invite you over so you can ask the question herself. Let's see. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and read the question. She said, this is beautiful. Love this. But we are only a company of 3. There we go. Oh, she's here. Hi. There you are.
Oh my gosh, I didn't think I was going to actually be on the video.
It's okay. Pleasant surprise.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, we're a new company and we're only 3 people. And I love documentation and all of that. But I'm just wondering, like, I don't even know how to get started, because we have still new tools that we're using. We have like a mission and vision, but as we grow, obviously we're going to have to set some standards. Like, where do you even start with that? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I can. I don't know if Zay on the chat can hear it, but Zay, can you just let us know if you could hear Meg now?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
No, I don't think it can. Anyway, I'll repeat it for the sake of everyone. So Meg's question is about being a small company, and right now there are 3-4 people in the team right now. They're using several tools, but of course, as they grow, the documentation needs are going to be changing, of course. So Meg, what I usually think about this is the value of documentation usually shines after you do it. Right? Thinking about, oh, should I document this? Do we need to know? Like, we all know this, but I found myself reading pieces of documentation that I wrote and in the meantime forgot. And also, it also helps if you start earlier than later, because the later you start, the more catching up you'll have to do for the whole strategy and process and everything. And one of the things that has helped us at Gitlab is that we started this very early. So very early on, the geniuses that started in Gitlab decided to lead a what they call a documentation-led process. That means that if you want to change the process, you change the documentation first. Right. That means that whoever wants to know the process, all you have to do is go and check the documentation. And I can promise it's easier to do when you're 3 people in the team than when you're 30.
Yeah.
And by then you have 30 people already embracing your culture of documenting everything, and they will help fill in the documentation as well. Does that help?
Right. Yes, because we're trying to expand like a sales team now, and I manage everything since I'm the business owner. And so to add on documentation and not have to talk to people, I think is a great idea, but we're changing what we use so rapidly. Like, before we were using Microsoft Teams, and now we're using Discord, but we use email,
Yeah, I'm going to repeat that for the people that can hear you.
Okay.
So Meg is saying that right now they're changing a lot the tooling and going from Teams, Microsoft Teams to Discord and that sort of thing. I feel like that path is important to document. Like, March 2020, we were using this set of tools, and then we dropped this because of that. You write that, and you archive it to a section of like defunct tools or something. And that way, whoever comes after will be able to see, we've tried Microsoft Teams. Because when I hire someone who's going to love Microsoft Teams and going to try to push it on you, you're like, all right, so we had these problems in the past. Do these problems still exist now? Maybe the problem was that the team was too small for Microsoft Teams. I don't know. So documenting what you felt at the time will help your future self understand the choices that you made in the past much better. So yeah, I would definitely get started on documenting right now, even though you're small. Maybe you don't need to document right away, stock options program right away. but there is some things that you will see that are so crucial to your business, and that usually goes to what am I being asked on a daily basis. For example, if you're having to do invoicing and expenses, how do you do right away? And if you're having the problem that somebody's always forgetting to put the VAT number on the invoices that they use to buy material, like put that in the documentation. For expensing things, make sure you do this, and this. And you will help yourself, because by writing it for others, you'll be helping yourself too.
That's super helpful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Meg, for jumping on.
Yeah,
I'm going to check in. June.
Right.
I'm going to control the questions.
Yes. Next question. Hold on. We have Pedro who asked about GitLab and GitHub and Atlassian toolset. I'm going to invite him over.
June, maybe we can try and see if people can hear Pedro, but if they can't hear Pedro, I can just read the questions myself, because it's going to be boring for them.
Yes, indeed. Right. Oh, I already invited him over, but
right. So he joined.
He joined. Yes, there we are.
Hello,
Pedro.
Hi.
Hi,
Pedro. Yeah.
So I actually I freelance and I do different kinds of things, but one of them is that I help companies, usually startups, with operations, and I have a technical background as well, so I'm used to using all these tools. But in the past, and they've had this problem. I think Meg was talking about the fact that some companies come late to this whole process of organizing documentation, and it becomes a huge hassle. And I've dealt with this in the past, and actually recently with a startup that I was working for a few months, and we were using Atlassian, and so we were trying to migrate everything, because they also had G Suite. We were trying to migrate all the kinds of information and creating also a single source of information. I actually didn't know that people called it that, but I was conveying that idea that, what we should have. So I called it a master document. But one place where when someone is onboarded, which is usually the most important moment, when you onboard someone, they can go there and you can save people's time because no need to tell them, because they can just go there. But I wanted to understand, because obviously we won't have one tool to do the whole thing. I mean, we had Skype, then we were using Slack. We used I think it was GitLab, and we even had GitLab, and people were using different things. And then we had Atlassian. It was a huge mess. In G Suite, and I know maybe others, I don't know. So obviously we want in the future to have one place where we do everything and it has most of those functionalities. I mean, one of the things that I've always been very bullish about is having tools like Confluence, like you have in Confluence and Atlassian, which is sort of a Wikipedia kind of thing for your whole company. So my question was, how do you compare yourselves to GitHub on the one hand, which is originally closer to what you are, but from what you said, you're going more in the direction of having a whole tool set like Atlassian. So I wanted to know what could make me choose.
So and thank you for that context, Pedro. That will help me give the answer. But to summarize it for the people that can't hear you, the question is how do we? And it's normal for companies to use multiple tools, but how does GitLab compare to GitHub and Atlassian? So at GitLab, we have a mission of fulfilling the full life cycle of DevOps. That includes planning the project, creating the project, verifying with CI, continuous integration, continuous deployment, launching it into production, monitoring production, and after you send things into production, you can still monitor it within GitLab. So we try to encompass this whole life cycle into this whole thing. So I would say the big difference is we've started from start as open source and open core, so you can contribute your own features to GitLab. I don't think that's as easy to do for other companies. So we've had plenty of features that have been contributed exclusively by community members. So every milestone we have, which comes out every month, we have always a bunch of features that we didn't wrote it. We didn't wrote them. Somebody in the community felt they had an itch that they wanted to scratch, and they scratched it by pushing up code for our review. Now, they all go through the review process by the company, so we don't accept like a sneaky code and anything. But that would be my biggest difference. Not only you're able to host GitLab as a self-hosted instance in your data center, but other competitors also allow that. But we're at least trying to have a more complete mission, because if you grab what GitHub does, that spans like 3 out of, I don't know, 10 stages that GitLab covers. But not only that, we're also open to your contributions and hearing even if you don't know how to code, opening an issue in our tracker can suggest a feature for a particular area that you're feeling a need. So yeah, that's my answer. Hope that helps.
Yeah, and the other, because actually, this is the last thing I'll say, is that you guys were just ranked first and GitHub second in just a few days ago or something, or a few weeks ago, recently on one of these rankings for 2020 for the #1. So that's all that got me curious, because I had heard about it, other people had used it, and Atlassian, and for Atlassian, I mean, you'd say that Atlassian has at the moment still has a more complete feature set.
Yeah, so they do have a bunch of tooling. So Atlassian, Pedro was asking about Atlassian. Yeah, Atlassian does have whole other tools, like Confluence is very normal for people to mention. So I think that goes to each company's requirements and taste and decision makers. What I do think it's important is the least amount of tools you use for one goal, the better. So I've heard of stories, people using Confluence and other places to put documentation. So if you're having, and bringing it back to the topic of documentation, if you have two sets or two places where you put documentation, there's a fragment there. Like people are going to be having a hard time crossing over to the other one. So unifying them will make sure that everybody has access to the documentation and can update it too. So, and following one only process. So yeah, they have a great product. So do we. So it's up to the clients kind of but we do have pages to compare them and
yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Pedro. June, should I go into the questions and start coming down and asking and answering?
Yes. Thank you so much for asking a question, Pedro. I'm going to remove you from the screen now. There you go. Cool. Right. Yeah, you can go down with the questions.
I see one question, the Q1. Someone sent it through June. Thank you. So we scaled from 5 to 50 people very rapidly and didn't have an official operations manager who handles all these things like processes. We do have managers in each department and they have processes of their own, but we don't have to interact with each other. How do you propose we start our documentation? Where do we begin? This is a great question, because it's normal to have the situation happen where each department has been evolving in their own direction. And now we'll get to a point where we don't know what each other is doing or using, right? So the one thing I'd recommend, where do I propose to start with our documentation is, so somebody be determined to be the person responsible for setting up the documentation, get that role in place, get someone to own this process. And that will be the person preparing the infrastructure for the documentation, choosing the tool, getting everyone's feedback, whatever, but finding the tool that everybody will use, and then creating sections, just like I did with that example of having a section per team. Give them their own corner of the documentation, and then give each manager the task of, hey, document your process as much as you can onto those documents, onto those pages. You can give them structures, like make sure that you have this section, like tooling, communication, ceremonies, like meetings that you do on a weekly basis. So give them tasks to have them fill in their sections. And you will still have a fragmented approach, your fragmented documentation, because each department is writing their own, but at least it will be visible. And as a first step, you'll be able to look at them and try to start to see what's common, what's not common. And then as a second step, probably you can start unifying them, and you can start saying, oh, wait, you're using a very similar tool that these are using. Can we just talk and see if we can unify it as one? And you're probably going to save costs on the company as well, because if you're using two tools and you're paying for those, you don't know about it, actually, oh, wait, we can just use just one and stop paying for two services. So that would be my recommendation, is start documenting what you have now. Because first, it'll be useful for the teams within those departments. And then at a higher stage, you can look at every department and try to start to see the commonalities on it.
Yeah, just to follow up on that question, I'm guessing you mentioned to assign somebody, right? To basically appoint the person who would be in charge of all of the documentation. Is this going to be the same person who will approve of the revisions? Or because it's, for example, these are different departments, and that person might not belong to that department, right? And doesn't know that process. How do you handle those kinds of interactions or like those revisions?
So what I mean by having someone responsible for it is to have someone own the process of establishing it, just to have it happen. Because if you're asking a company like as a whole to just, people start documenting, but you don't give them a place to put the things, the words, that will take a bit of time. So what we do, and we didn't make up this concept, but by having directly responsible individuals, you'll be able to have that person responsible for driving this forward. Now, in terms of who gets to approve each update to each section, then you're going to have to go through the company's internal hierarchy, right? Each company will have its own culture. For example, at Gitlab, we do have a culture where everybody can contribute, but then the change for each process will be in charge of a certain group of maintainers, for example. So that means that only certain people can merge the changes. And those people know that for me to change this section, I need to make sure that the person who's responsible for this section is in agreement with these changes of the process. Say, a couple of months ago, somebody opened a change to change the parental leave policy. That was immediately merged, right? That went through a process of discussion, but everybody was able to contribute to that discussion. And then the department that owned that part, the policy for parental leave, they were the ones making the call whether this could go into the documentation or not. Now, these tools that I'm talking about, like Notion, they're very bare bones and very simple. But if you need that part of review process, you're going to have to find tools that allow that. And if you have engineering staff, they can start building yourself a website. And then to propose a change, you have to go through an approval process. That's up to each company to decide. But at this point, it's getting started. I guess it's the biggest question. And my recommendation is to embrace transparency and trust within the company. For starters, let's give each other their section and have themselves self-organized to update that. But having a DRI is just to get it off the ground. The approval process will have to depend on the company.
Okay. Sounds good. Moving on to the next question.
Yeah. So this Q2, there's only 4 of us in the agency and we're all freelancers. Do you think documentation is still important for us when we're technically not employees and not working full time? So this is kind of the answer that I gave to Meg earlier, but I would just complete it with another thing is this is the same answer. The team will grow, but also this will benefit each other. Just by having 3 other colleagues, if you write things down, if you write notes of your meetings in a place that everybody can see, even if they are working in separate clients, you still have, apparently, if you're sharing an agency, you're going to have shared processes. You're going to have shared responsibilities for some reason. So writing them down and making sure that all 4 of you know it will be key to make sure that there's no, you're buying different tools for the same thing, so you can save costs there too. And more than anything, I will know what the other people are using, so I can learn from them and start evolving that even better. So yeah, just document it, start writing what you have right now and what's important for you right now. And if you don't have anything, great, but I've seen open source projects, like I know for a fact Vue.js, for example, they're using tools like this to share the notes amongst the entire group, and they're all remote, like they're not in the same place, and that's useful for them to learn from each other and to evolve. So yeah.
Sounds good.
Right. Q3, I'm a solo founder, solopreneur. Oh, I've never heard that word. Thanks for that. Do I still need this? How soon should I start making it? So by solo founder, I'm kind of interpreting that they don't have employees yet. So the thing is, if you start early, whoever comes next will benefit from that. Now, you probably don't need to, like I was saying, you probably don't need to document everything. But for example, if you're defining an architecture for a product, if you document like the initial architecture for it, of course, people coming after will have an easier time understanding what you're doing. And I would say that if you're solo, there's even a bigger risk of losing information along the way. The decisions you made, no one else is there to see them except you. So probably a journal would be nice, a private journal. You can create your own internal tool for this, like a private blog, like a WordPress setup with a P2 to drop in ideas and document what you're doing as you evolve the company. Whoever comes after will be able to see why you made those decisions. And you yourself will probably see, oh yeah, I didn't remember that. So how soon? I would say now is a good idea to start documenting what you have and making it in a way that people can build upon it and join it later when they join the company. Because I'm expecting that you don't want to be a solo founder forever. So you're probably going to have employees in the future. So if you're planning on having a remote team, now is a good place to start, but definitely don't go overboard of spending like a week documenting things just for you. But it seems like an important thing to start taking notes on your own, even if it's a Notion, and then you can expand it as people join the team. Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, actually, just to add on that one, because that was from my friend. He's basically a freelancer, but he works with different clients and different companies. So basically, I think I would add to that saying that sometimes there were decisions made or there were tasks updated that you would completely forget later on. Just like what you said, it's for the benefit of you, and also documenting it makes it easier for you to assign it to another person. When you're doing everything on your own, you don't really think of processes, but then imagine you hire a VA, right? Or maybe you hire the design the creative part of your business. Now you need to go ahead and explain everything to that person. But you having all of these documented, it's much easier for you to scale that way, unless you just want to stay, by yourself. Right, and it works too for some people, but
True.
yeah,
You're right. I think it's important for people coming after. And the one thing the easiest way to know what needs to be documented is noticing what you keep being asked. That's it. It's like if you're getting questions all the time and you're answering the same thing every time, that is an immediate thing that needs to be documented. But if you have something like a frequently asked questions from clients, for example, that's going to benefit the whole team of sales, for example, knowing what other people are being asked. So there's a lot of special niche thing that you can decide for your own company.
Yeah. Teresa asked, what if you need to document 8 years from the past? So it's like backtracking all of the things that you did, for the past 8 years. Where do you even begin?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I think a lot of people will be asking these days.
Yeah.
They didn't have the habit. And remember, you had the habit of having a common physical space, and now you've probably moved to a remote distance space. Could be temporary, could be could be temporary, could be permanent, it could be semi-permanent, of having bits and pieces linger after this whole crisis goes over. So what I think is important right now is, one, get it started. And then what you would get started on right now is answering the questions that everybody in your team is having by moving to home, right? How do I do calls? What are we using? How do I set up? Who do I ask for help if I need help? The thing is, I got distracted. The same. as the last question, but the solo part was
The question.
right. So again, you're going to have to find the relevant pieces of your story for the people now. Definitely don't want to start documenting things that won't be useful. So looking at the reality that you have now, which was what I was saying, people are struggling to find methods to work at home. You can have a gathering of resources, of tips, how to make this work, whether it's the way you communicate, the tools that you use to communicate, or tips to dealing with kids in the house. You can create a section of your handbook to create that, give that tip to the whole company, and the whole company can contribute. And all you have to do is create a section, tips for parents, share that amongst everyone, or ping everyone on the tool or something. And then people would kind of like collaboratively just add tips that work for them. So that would be my recommendation, is if you have to start documenting 8 years, think about what's useful now for this transition stage. And then you can go over and start the deeper stuff. One of the things that I feel is most important is documenting the culture of the company, the values, the mission, that sort of thing, because then you'll have guidance for the rest. And then embracing the single source of truth concept is incredibly important, especially even if you're just solo and you want to have people joining your team. Having that culture will make a huge difference down the line by having it written down in one place and not having to go scavenger between different documents to find the information.
Yeah, and I think it's also a good reminder for you as the first person, in the company. When you start adding people in, you go back to your documentation that these were my values, this was the mission of the company, and this new person that I'm adding, how does he relate to these things that I have written down, right? And then you go ahead and document your onboarding process.
Very important. Like I that was one of the things I wrote in my example guidebook thing, because that was the one thing that impressed me the most. Was one of the things that impressed me when I joined Gitlab was I had an issue for myself with a checklist for every step that I needed to do when I onboarded. And they needed to do that because they wouldn't be next to me telling me what to do. So they had to, that was a need that they had to solve. And the issue with the checklist, mind blown. Like that was an incredible way of starting, where I knew exactly what to do per day. On the first week, they had exemplary, like set up Google Suite, set up 1Password, set up this, set up that. And that was a great way to start on a remote environment because I had exactly guidance on what I needed to do. So yeah, onboarding is one of the things that definitely is important to document.
Right, and I think it also makes things more automatic. It automates, a lot of tasks. The onboarding process, the tasks that you will be doing, moving on forward. And if there's any iteration, it's easier for you to come in and do the iteration for the next person who will take over.
Sure.
Right.
My question.
Yes. How is okay?
You're welcome.
Yeah. How is this different from a KB? This is from me. How is this different from a knowledge base, right? Because we do, my other clients, they also have knowledge base, and it's more on like, if there is a problem, I go there. That's mainly, I guess, what we use the KB, right?
Right. So first, I want to say is that each person has a concept for a knowledge base, and I don't know exactly what you mean by a knowledge base. Do you want to clarify a little bit more?
Well, it's like when you have problems with the processes that we have a person to talk to if you have issues with your computer, right? Or if you have issues with deliveries, or if you have problems with this particular tool. So we go to the knowledge base and we have the recommended steps to fix it. It's more like more on towards troubleshooting.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. So I feel like what we see as documentation, or we call it a handbook or a guidebook or something, is something to assist people in the company doing their job. Some knowledge bases are built for exclusively people doing customer support. Other are for users directly on the website. You have a knowledge base so that they can navigate it on their own. So it depends on what the target is. Honestly, nothing is stopping you from mixing these things and making the knowledge base for users public and the rest private. It's up to you, really. But I think that what probably different is the goal. Like whenever you write a knowledge base, you have a one specific thing in mind. When you're writing something like this, like the company handbook, you're writing the policy, like time off policy. What's your time off policy? You probably wouldn't put that in a knowledge base, but you put that here because it will be helpful for your employees. I think that the difference is the goal or the target. Like the handbook is built for employees. The knowledge base is probably built for other people, I guess. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it depends on the purpose of that documentation, right? So the way I'm understanding it is that the KB that we had is more towards when we have a problem, like a troubleshooting, wherein a handbook is much more. A KB can be a portion of the handbook, but the handbook has more information with regards to the company.
Right.
Right.
And I personally, for example, I was
depending on the team.
Sorry.
I
was using handbook every time that I need to know, oh wait, how's our expense policy really? I go up there and I have the capture of this today, what it's like today, because it might have changed in the last week. And of course, those changes have to be communicated, probably on Slack. So wait, why is my video off? Okay, yeah. So probably those policies have changed. So communicating the changes is also important, but having a place to capture the last version is super key. So you can point people, oh wait, the expense policy changed, go read it here, something like that.
Right, and if there were any revisions on any policies, you would know when it was changed and who changed it. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
We have another question from Teresa. Depending on the team structure, to which point do you integrate suggestions or just stay true to your ideas? Solve a problem. Yeah, I guess this is like, if you were the founder and then you brought in teams and they start suggesting stuff.
Yeah.
At what point do you integrate?
That is a great question. What I usually say about these things is, well, you hired people that are usually smarter than you. Just that's how I try to do hiring. But you do have to bear in mind that some decisions are going to be better for certain kinds of activities. And if you're doing things on your own, you're doing it all by yourself. So you don't have time to bootstrap another tool. So you're trying to make sure that whatever you're using is a Swiss Army knife. Like you can do anything there. Whereas if you're having a larger team, then you start having more capacity for other kinds of tools and needing other kinds of processes, right? I remember a time where for Gitlab, whenever we need to have access to a system, we would just ask the people on Slack. But then now you have a process to ask access to that tool, right? So in that, the difference is that the company is no longer less than 100 people. Now we're over 1,000. So processes have to change with size. And you as a founder or solo founder, you have to adapt to that and make sure that you don't grab hold of what you chose because you love that product. We have all had that. I remember there was in the previous job, we were using Pivotal Tracker and Trello for kind of the same thing, except Trello, people in the sales and business department, they were using Trello. We were using Pivotal Tracker for engineering. From the moment that we unified it to the same tool, productivity went through the roof because we had people from product and from other areas come into the engineering side and be aware of what was happening. So it's important for you to let go a little bit and make people the owners of those decisions. I really love the concept of GitLab having a DRI and then everybody can contribute. So we separate the two processes. One is the decision gathering, and then the decision making. So gathering is that everybody can contribute. So everybody can jump on an issue and drop their thoughts, even whether it's a parental leave change of process or the new JavaScript framework that we're going to use. Everybody can jump in and have their own suggestions, but we'll have one person who will make the call, right? We don't expect consensus, but we do have the good part of the consensus, which is gathering a lot of ideas and a lot of feedback on a step. But then one person will make the call, but they will own that call, right? So yeah, that's my recommendation. Let go a little bit, but then also try to keep a pragmatic view and keep adapting.
Right. So basically, let's just say the size of the other questionnaire that there's only 4 or 5 person in the company, right? Notion is very, very basic. So if they don't have that